Girls, in today's video, I'm going to tell you a story you won't believe. My 45-year-old neighbor is cheating on her husband with a 20-year-old guy, and from what I saw through the crack in my curtain, things are very serious between them. Don't miss this video because what I discovered will blow your mind. Hey everyone, every day here on this channel, we bring you a new story, a new piece of gossip I see behind the scenes in my neighborhood. And today I have a bombshell to share with you. First of all, like the video, subscribe to the channel to be notified whenever I post new gossip, and leave a comment telling us what you think of this situation. And please, stay tuned, because the ending of this story is truly surprising. But before we begin today's story, I always like to give a special tip to those of you who follow me. I've pinned some materials in the first comment that can transform your life. There's content on diet, insomnia, natural treatments, spiritual growth. In short, content that will help you and also support our channel. Just click the link pinned in the comments and download it. Now let's get to the point. You know I've always been an observant person, right? And look, my habit of keeping an eye on the neighborhood has yielded me many interesting stories. But the one I'm going to tell you today has really intrigued me for weeks. The story begins about 2 months ago. I was in my living room having afternoon tea when I decided to take a peek at the street through the crack in the curtain. It's a habit of mine, I admit. I like to see the movement, who's arriving, who's leaving, you know how it is. And it was at that moment that I saw something that really caught my attention. My neighbor Elena, a beautiful woman of 45, married to Diego for over 20 years, was on her porch talking to a young man I'd never seen around. And when I say young man, I mean young man. He looked to be around 20, 25 at most. A tall, dark-haired, well-dressed young man, but clearly much younger than her. At first, I thought it might be a relative visiting, maybe a nephew or something. But something about their posture caught my attention. They were talking in a very intimate way, you know? It wasn't the formal conversation we have with distant relatives. It was something more intimate. Elena was wearing a light blue dress, the kind that really accentuates the figure, and her hair was down, something she rarely did when she was home. She usually wore it in a bun, but that day was different. And the boy, whose name I later discovered was Gabriel, was leaning against the porch wall, looking relaxed, as if he'd known the house for a long time. They talked for about 15 minutes, and I stood there watching, trying to figure out what the relationship was between them. What intrigued me most was when he left. Elena stood on the porch watching him walk away down the street, and the way she looked. Girls, it was a look I recognized well. It was the look of a woman interested, you know? That night, I thought a lot about that scene. Elena's husband, Diego, travels a lot for work. He's a sales representative for a large company and spends at least 2 weeks a month away from home. And coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidentally, the young man had shown up on one of the days Diego was traveling. In the following days, I started paying more attention. I confess that my curiosity had been piqued. And you know how it is when you get a flea in your ear, right? You can't stop thinking about it. And 3 days later, he showed up again. It was a Thursday morning around 10 o'clock. I was watering my plants on the porch when I saw Gabriel coming down the street. This time he was more casual, in jeans and a t-shirt, but still very well groomed. And most interestingly, he didn't ring the doorbell. Elena opened the door before he even reached the porch, as if she'd been waiting for him. This made me think they had arranged the meeting. It wasn't a surprise visit, it was something planned. And when Elena opened the door, she was dressed in a way I rarely saw. She had makeup on, a new dress I'd never seen before, and even perfumed, I could tell by the way she carried herself, so careful with her movements. Gabriel entered the house, and I waited to see how long he would stay. An hour passed, then 2 hours, then 3 hours. He only left late in the afternoon, around 5 o'clock. And when he left, you won't believe it, Elena went to the gate to say goodbye to him. She didn't stand at the door as usual, but went to the gate, right on the street. And there, at the gate, something happened that truly left me speechless. They hugged. It wasn't a quick, casual goodbye hug. It was a long hug, the kind we give to special people. And when they parted, Gabriel held her hand for a few seconds before walking away. At that moment, my suspicions were confirmed. Something was going on between them. But I still didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, there could be an innocent explanation for all of this, right? But as the days passed, the pattern became clear. Gabriel always showed up when Diego was traveling, always staying at the house for several hours. And there was always this intimacy between them that didn't feel at all familial or friendly. It was a romantic intimacy. There was no denying it. 2 weeks later, I witnessed a scene that truly clarified what was happening. It was a Saturday morning, and Diego had left on Friday for a weekend-long trade show. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard voices in the backyard of the house next door. I looked out the kitchen window, which offers a partial view of their backyard, and you won't believe what I saw. Elena and Gabriel were having breakfast at the garden table. It wasn't a morning visit, it was a couple's breakfast, you know. They were in their robes, relaxed, talking quietly, and laughing a lot. And what struck me most was how natural the scene was. They didn't seem to be doing anything secretive or feeling guilty. They looked like a normal couple enjoying a quiet weekend breakfast. Gabriel even helped clear the table when they were finished, as if it were a routine occurrence for him. After coffee, they chatted in the backyard for a while longer. Elena showed him the plants she grows in her garden, and he seemed genuinely interested. He even helped her prune some roses that needed tending. All morning I watched discreetly, and what struck me most was their complicity. They conversed with an ease only couples who've known each other for a long time possess. Gabriel knew where things were in the house. Elena didn't need to explain anything to him. It was as if he were already part of the routine of that house. Around noon, they went inside, and I didn't see anything else until late afternoon, when Gabriel left, and this time the goodbye was even more affectionate than the other times. Elena walked him to his car, which I only discovered was his that day, and they talked, leaning against the car, for about 10 minutes. When he finally drove away, Elena stood on the sidewalk, watching the car drive away until it disappeared around the corner. And the way she stood there, with a smile on her face, was the look of a woman in love. There was no denying it. That night, I could barely sleep, thinking about everything I'd seen. On the one hand, I felt bad about spying on my neighbor. On the other, I couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Was Elena cheating on Diego? Or was there something I didn't know about their relationship? Diego always seemed to me a man dedicated to his work, but perhaps too absent from home. He traveled a lot, always arrived late when he was in town, and the few times I saw them together, they didn't seem to have the intimacy a couple should have after 20 years of marriage. But still, seeing Elena with another man, especially one so much younger, confused me. She always seemed like a serious woman, dedicated to her family. They don't have children, but they always seemed like a stable couple, you know? The following week, I decided to take a closer look. Not that I was going to do anything with this information, but my curiosity had been piqued beyond my control. And you know how it is, right, girls? When you're intrigued by something, you can't stop thinking about it. And that's when I started noticing other details that had gone unnoticed before. Elena had changed. She was more well-groomed, more put together, even when she was alone at home. She started wearing more modern clothes, changed her haircut, and even her posture was different. She seemed more Young, more confident. I also noticed she started leaving the house more. Before, she'd only leave to go to the grocery store or run a few errands. But in the last few weeks, she's been leaving the house several times a day. Always well-dressed, always in a hurry to get back. And Gabriel continued to show up regularly. Not every day, but at least 3 times a week. Always when Diego was away. And each visit lasted several hours. Sometimes he arrived in the morning and didn't leave until the evening. Other times he arrived in the afternoon and stayed until very late. One thing that really intrigued me was that they never went out together. Gabriel would always go to Elena's house, stay there for hours, but I never saw them going out together. It made me wonder if they were trying to keep it a secret, if they were afraid of being seen together on the street. But on the other hand, they didn't seem to be hiding inside the house. They were in the yard, on the porch, at the windows, as if they didn't care if anyone saw them. It was a very strange, very contradictory situation. That's when I started to wonder if there was something I wasn't aware of about their situation. Maybe Elena and Diego were separated. Maybe they had an open relationship. Or maybe Elena really was cheating on her husband and simply didn't care if anyone found out. All these possibilities ran through my mind, but I had no way of knowing which was true. And I confess it was consuming me. I woke up every day thinking about Elena and Gabriel, spent the whole day paying attention to their movements, and went to sleep still thinking about it. Girls, you know how it is when we get obsessed with some gossip, right? We can't think about anything else until we find out the whole truth. And that's exactly how I was with this situation. And then something happened that completely changed my perspective on everything. But I'll tell you about that later because you need to know all the details of what I discovered. Don't look away because what happened next will surprise you. One morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard loud voices coming from Elena's house. It wasn't an argument, just normal voices. But since the windows were open because of the heat, I could hear them clearly. And one of those voices was male, but it wasn't Gabriel's. It was a more mature, deeper voice. I ran to the living room window, which gave a better view of their house, and saw an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house. A silver executive car, very well maintained. And through Elena's open living room window, I could see part of the conversation that was taking place. It was Elena, Gabriel, and 2 other men I didn't know. They were all dressed more formally, as if it were a business meeting. They were sitting around the living room table, papers spread out, and the conversation seemed quite serious. This intrigued me even more. What kind of meeting was this? Why was Gabriel attending? And who were those men? With each passing day, the situation became more mysterious, and I became more curious to discover the truth. All morning, the 4 of them huddled together in the living room. Sometimes the conversation got lively, sometimes more serious, but it always seemed to be about important matters. And Elena seemed to be in command, doing most of the talking. Around noon, the 2 strangers left, but Gabriel stayed. And then the routine returned to normal. They had lunch together, chatted in the backyard, and Gabriel didn't leave until late afternoon. But that meeting had planted a seed in my head. Maybe it wasn't just an affair. Maybe there was more to this story. Maybe Elena and Gabriel had some kind of professional relationship as well. Over the next few days, I continued observing, trying to better understand the dynamic between them. And that's when I began to notice small details I'd previously overlooked. Gabriel always arrived with a briefcase, as if he were bringing documents or work materials. Elena always had papers scattered on her desk when he arrived. And during their conversations, I saw them sometimes point to documents, as if they were analyzing or discussing something specific. This made me think that maybe they had some project together, some business they were running. But still, it didn't explain all that intimacy between them, all those loving hugs, all that couple-like complicity. And that's when I had an idea. If they really had some kind of professional project together, maybe I could find out more by researching them online. After all, almost everything is online these days, right? I started searching for Elena's name on social media. She wasn't very active online, but she had some basic profiles. It was through searching for her that I discovered some interesting things about her life that I hadn't known before. I discovered that Elena had a degree in architecture, but hadn't practiced the profession for many years. She had stopped working soon after marrying Diego, and since then had dedicated herself solely to taking care of the house. But recently, she had reposted some architecture-related photos, some projects she seemed to be working on. And in some of these photos, guess who appeared? Gabrielle. They were visiting construction sites, examining blueprints, and chatting with other professionals. And in the photo captions, Elena mentioned that she was reviving her career with the help of a very special partner. Partner! That word really caught my attention. So they were professional partners? That would explain the meetings, the documents, the time they spent together. But it still didn't explain all that personal intimacy I'd observed. I continued researching and discovered Gabriel's profile. He was indeed young, 23 years old, a recent architecture graduate, and apparently very talented in the field. He had some interesting projects in his portfolio, and many professional connections for someone so new in his career. And in Gabriel's photos, Elena appeared frequently, always in professional settings, but with a closeness that went beyond professional. They were always smiling, always very close, always with a very evident chemistry. That's when I began to understand that maybe it wasn't just a professional issue, nor just a personal one. Maybe it was a combination of both. Maybe Elena had found in Gabrielle not just a professional partner, but also a personal connection that was missing in her life. And thinking about it, it made sense. Elena had stopped working over 20 years ago to dedicate herself to her marriage. Diego traveled a lot, and when he was home, he always seemed busy with work. Elena probably felt alone, without purpose, without a true identity beyond being Diego's wife. And then Gabriel appears, a talented, energetic young man who not only offers her an opportunity to revive her career, but also brings a new perspective to her life. Someone who sees her as a competent professional, who values her ideas, and who is interested in her opinions. But still, the age difference intrigued me. 22 years is no small feat. And the intimacy I observed between them truly seemed to go beyond the professional. There was something romantic there. I was sure. It was then that I decided I needed to find out more about their situation. And you won't believe what I discovered when I started investigating further. But that's for the next part of the story, because what I discovered completely changed my opinion of everything that was happening. And that's when I decided to do something I probably shouldn't have. But curiosity was getting the better of me, ladies. I decided to look for more information about Diego, Elena's husband. After all, if she was getting involved with another man, maybe there was a reason behind it, something in her marriage that justified it. I started observing Diego's habits more closely when he was at home. And do you know what I discovered? He practically ignored Elena. When he came home from his trips, he barely greeted her properly. He'd go straight to his office and stay there, fiddling with his computer until late at night. On the rare weekends he was home, he spent all his time on his phone or watching games on TV. Elena tried to talk to him, but he responded with monosyllables, you know. It was, yes, no, we'll see later. I'm busy right now. A coldness that made me feel sorry for Elena just watching. And the saddest part was seeing Elena struggling to please a man who clearly didn't value her. She'd prepare special dinners when he returned from his trip, dress up beautifully, but Diego barely noticed. He'd eat while looking at his phone, finish, and go straight to the office. It was heartbreaking, man. During one of these observations, I witnessed a scene that truly resonated with me. It was a Friday night. Diego had returned from a week-long trip. Elena had spent the entire day cooking, setting the table with beautiful china, and even lighting candles to create a romantic ambiance. When Diego arrived, she greeted him excitedly, wearing a new dress, makeup, and perfumed. And do you know what his reaction was? He barely glanced at her, murmured a soft, "Hi," went straight to the bathroom to shower, and when he came down for dinner, he brought his laptop with him and worked throughout the meal. Elena tried to chat about her week, about some projects she was working on, which I now knew were with Gabriel, but Diego showed no interest. He responded without even looking up from his computer screen. After dinner, Elena cleaned up alone while Diego went to his office. When she finished tidying the kitchen, she went there to try to talk to him, but he said he was busy with urgent spreadsheets and that they'd talk another day. Elena stood in the office doorway for a few minutes, and I could see the frustration on her face, even from a distance. That night, Elena stayed alone in the living room, watching TV until late, while Diego stayed locked in his office. And on Saturday morning, he woke up, drank coffee while reading the newspaper in silence, and announced that he was going to play golf with some clients and wouldn't be back until evening. Elena spent the entire Saturday alone at home, tending the garden, cleaning things that were already clean, clearly at a loss for things to do. And as I stood there, observing all that solitude, I began to understand why she'd become interested in Gabriel. Gabriel represented everything she was missing in life: attention, genuine interest in her ideas, companionship, youthful energy. He treated her as an interesting person, as a competent professional, as someone who deserved to be heard and valued. And you know what struck me most? On the days Gabriel visited Elena, she was radiant. I'd see her through the window and she seemed like a completely different person. She laughed more, moved with more energy, seemed more alive, more herself. One Tuesday, I was watering my plants when I saw Gabriel arriving with a bouquet of flowers in his hands. They weren't expensive or extravagant, just simple daisies, the kind you buy at the market. But the gesture was so sweet that it touched me deeply. Elena opened the door, and when she saw the flowers, the smile she gave was one of genuine happiness, you know? It was the smile of someone who wasn't used to receiving affectionate gestures. She smelled the flowers, hugged Gabriel, and the two of them stood there at the door talking about the flowers as if they were the most special thing in the world. Then they came in, and I saw them through the living room window, Elena arranging flowers in a vase while Gabriel helped her. It was such a simple scene, yet so full of affection that it made me compare it to the interactions I'd seen between Elena and Diego. The difference was stark. With Gabriel, Elena was always smiling, always engaging, always seeming interested and interesting. With Diego, she was always trying to get attention, always being ignored, always seeming diminished. And it was around this time that I began to notice Elena changing physically as well. She was losing weight, but in a healthy way, like someone who's taking better care of herself. She started wearing younger, more colorful clothes. She changed her haircut to something more modern. Even her posture was different, more upright, more confident. One afternoon, I was on the porch when I saw Elena leaving the house, all dressed up, carrying a briefcase and wearing an outfit I'd never seen before. She was clearly heading to some business appointment. Half an hour later, Gabriel drove by and picked her up on the corner. This made me realize they had started hanging out together, but discreetly, meeting away from home to avoid attracting attention from the neighborhood. And honestly, it made me admire their prudence, because regardless of the situation, they were respectful of everyone's privacy. But what intrigued me most was Diego's reaction to all these changes in Elena. Was he just not noticing? Didn't he notice that his wife was different, more cared for, more energetic, leaving the house more? And that's when I discovered something that truly shocked me. One Thursday night, Diego was home, which was unusual for a weekday. I was in the kitchen when I heard loud voices coming from their house. It wasn't a fight, but it was a tense conversation, I could tell by the tone. I caught bits and pieces of the conversation, and what I heard left me speechless. Diego was confronting Elena about the changes in her behavior, about her going out more, about her spending money on new clothes and beauty treatments. But it wasn't concern or jealousy, folks. It was irritation. He was mad because she was spending money for nothing, as he put it. He was complaining that she was getting involved with work again after so long, that it would disrupt the household routine. And Eleanor's response completely surprised me. She didn't get defensive like I expected. She was firm, saying she had every right to resume her career, that she had been on hold for too long, and that if he didn't like the changes, that was his problem. Diego was visibly irritated by her response. He said he didn't marry her to have a rebellious wife, that she was already old enough to be thinking about career nonsense, and that if she continued with this obsession with independence, they would have serious problems in their marriage. Girls, I was so angry hearing that. How can a husband talk to his own wife like that? Elena had every right to work, to take care of herself, to be independent. And Diego was trying to belittle her, control her, as if she were his property. And do you know what Elena's response was? She said that maybe it was time for them to have serious problems in their marriage, because the marriage they hadn't been working for her for a long time. The silence that followed was tense. Diego hadn't expected that response, and after a few minutes, I heard the door slam and saw him storm out of the house, getting into his car and speeding away. Elena was left alone in the house, and I saw her through the living room window. She wasn't crying or looking remorseful. She was sitting on the couch looking thoughtful, but also looking relieved, like she'd finally said something that had needed to be said for a long time. The next morning, Diego left home early with a large suitcase. Apparently, he had a business trip, but judging by the amount of luggage, it looked like it would be a long trip. And for the first time in all these months of observation, he left without saying goodbye to Elena. Not even a goodbye, folks. Elena stood on the porch watching him leave, and her expression wasn't one of sadness. It was one of someone releasing a burden. And a few hours later, guess who showed up? Gabriel. But this time was different from all the others. When Gabriel arrived, Elena practically ran to hug him. And it wasn't a casual hug, it was a long, desperate hug, as if she desperately needed that affection at that moment. They walked into the house, and throughout that day, I felt something fundamental shift in their dynamic. There was a different intensity, an emotional closeness I hadn't experienced before. Let me tell you in the comments what you think will happen at the end of this story, because I'm sure you'll be surprised. And if you're enjoying this gossip, don't forget that I pinned some materials that can transform your lives in the first comment. Just click the link and download the content I've prepared especially for you. That afternoon, they went out together for the first time. Elena got into Gabriel's car, and they drove off. I was incredibly curious to know where they had gone, and they only returned late in the afternoon, arriving together and chatting animatedly about something. When Gabriel left that day, the goodbye was unlike any other I'd ever witnessed. They kissed. It wasn't a kiss on the cheek from friends or family. It was a real kiss, long, passionate, on the lips. And in that moment, I knew for sure Elena was cheating on Diego. There was no longer any doubt. All my hunches were confirmed in that kiss. Elena had fallen in love with Gabriel, and apparently, he was in love with her too. But you know what intrigued me most? Elena didn't seem to feel guilty. After Gabriel left, she stood on the porch for a few minutes with a smile on her face, as if she were the happiest woman in the world. She didn't have the expression of someone doing something wrong or forbidden. In the following days, with Diego out of town, Elena and Gabriel grew even closer. He practically moved into her house temporarily. He would arrive early in the morning and only leave at night, sometimes not even leaving at all, staying there all night. And I began to notice that they were truly living as a couple. Gabriel helped with the housework. They cooked together, tended the garden together, watched television cuddled on the couch. It was complete domestic intimacy. One morning I was on the porch when I saw them having breakfast in the backyard, and the scene really touched me. Gabriel was reading something on his tablet to Elena, probably related to their professional projects, and she was paying attention, asking questions, offering her opinions. It was the kind of intellectual camaraderie I'd never seen between Elena and Diego. Gabriel treated Elena as an equal, as a partner in every sense, and Elena was flourishing in this environment of respect and affection. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about the whole situation. As absent and insensitive as Diego was, he was still Elena's husband. They'd been married for 20 years, had built a life together, and she was getting involved with a man who was old enough to be her son. On the other hand, seeing how happy Elena was, how much she seemed to be finding herself again as a person and as a professional, I wondered if she wasn't right to seek that happiness, even if it was in an unconventional way. And Gabriel, from what I could see, genuinely cared about her. It wasn't just a fling or a whim. He treated her with genuine affection, respected her opinions, and supported her professionally. It was a relationship that seemed to have substance, not just physical attraction. One afternoon, I was organizing my closets when I heard Elena's phone ring. She answered it in the backyard, near my kitchen window, so I could hear her conversation clearly. It was Diego calling from his trip, and you won't believe how cold their conversation was. Diego didn't even ask how she was doing. He went straight into talking about problems at work, complaining about clients, and the hotel where he was staying. Elena responded in monosyllables, clearly uninterested in the conversation. And when Diego finally asked how things were going, she simply said, "Everything normal," and quickly changed the subject. At the end of the call, Diego said he was extending his trip because an important business opportunity had come up, and he would be away for another week. Elena simply said, "Okay," and hung up. After hanging up, Elena stood in the backyard for a few minutes, staring at her phone, and I could tell by her posture that she was pondering something important. She didn't seem sad about the news that Diego would be away longer. In fact, she seemed relieved. That night, when Gabriel arrived and she told him about the liaison, his reaction was interesting. He didn't seem happy about the news, as I'd expect a lover to be. He seemed worried, as if he knew this situation couldn't continue indefinitely. They talked for a long time that night, sitting in the backyard, and although I couldn't hear what they were saying, I could tell it was a serious, important conversation about their future. And it was in that conversation that I realized they weren't just having a forbidden romance. They were planning something. They were making important decisions about their lives. Gabriel stayed at Elena's all night, and the next morning I saw them having breakfast in the backyard again. But this time, there was a different seriousness between them, as if they'd reached some important conclusion from the previous night's conversation. Over the next few days, I noticed a different movement in Elena's house. She began organizing papers and sorting things, as if preparing for some major life change. Gabriel helped with this organization, and I saw that they were separating personal documents from professional documents, as if they were organizing two distinct lives, Elena's personal life and the professional life they led together. And that's when I began to suspect Elena was preparing to leave Diego. All the signs pointed to it, the way she was organizing things, the coldness in her conversations with her husband, her growing intimacy with Gabriel. But at the same time, I wondered if she really had the courage to end a 20-year marriage to be with a man 22 years younger. It would be a very brave decision, but also a very risky one. One afternoon, I was in the living room when I saw an unfamiliar car pull up in front of Elena's house. It was a well-dressed gentleman with a briefcase, clearly not on a social visit. Elena met him at the door, and they went inside. Gabriel arrived shortly after, and the three of them gathered in the living room for about 2 hours. From the movement I could see through the windows, it appeared to be a formal meeting, with documents being reviewed and signed. When the man left, Elena and Gabriel stood on the porch talking, and I could see that they both looked relieved, as if they had resolved something important. That night they had dinner in the backyard, with candles lit and everything, as if they were celebrating something. And after dinner they danced. Yes, girls, they danced in the backyard, to music coming from inside the house. Watching that scene, I felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, it was beautiful to see Elena so happy, so in love, so alive. On the other hand, I couldn't help but think that she was still a married woman, and that regardless of the problems in her marriage, the situation was complicated. But what impressed me most was the maturity with which they handled everything. It wasn't a sordid affair. It wasn't a hidden, guilt-ridden affair. It was a relationship that, despite all the complexity of the situation, seemed to have seriousness and a future. And that's how I came to the conclusion that Elena really was going to leave Diego for Gabriel. All the signs pointed to it. The question that remained was, how would Diego react when he found out? And when would he find out? Because one thing I was sure of, the truth always comes out, doesn't it, girls? And when Diego returned from that long trip, he would face a very different reality than the one he had left behind. But what happened when Diego finally returned home was something I never imagined. His reaction was completely different from what I expected, and what I learned about the whole situation left me speechless. But you'll have to wait for that part of the story, because what comes next will surprise you as much as it surprised me. And girls, the time has come for me to tell you the truth about this whole situation that has intrigued me for so long. Because what I discovered completely changed my perspective on Elena, on Gabriel, and on everything I had observed during all these months. Diego returned from his trip on a Friday afternoon, after almost 2 weeks away. I was in the kitchen when I saw his car arrive, and I confess I was anxious to see his reaction to finding Elena so changed, so different from the woman he had left behind. But do you know what happened? Absolutely nothing. Diego arrived, greeted Elena with a distant wave, as always, grabbed his bags, and went straight to his room. Elena didn't even try to welcome him warmly, or ask how his trip had been. The two acted like strangers sharing the same house. That night, they ate dinner in silence, each one scrolling through their cell phones. Diego went to the office after dinner, as usual, and Elena stayed in the living room watching television. It was as if nothing had changed in their routine, as if those 2 weeks of transformation in Elena's life hadn't happened. But what struck me most was that Gabriel didn't show up that Friday, or even Saturday. Elena was left alone at home, and I wondered if they'd fought, if they'd broken up, if Elena had given up on changing her life because of her husband's return. On Sunday morning, I was watering the plants when I heard voices in Elena's house. They were calm, controlled, but I could tell they were serious. I listened closely and recognized the voices. Elena and Diego talking in the living room. And guys, you won't believe what I heard. It wasn't a discussion about cheating, about Gabriel, about anything I imagined. They were talking about their separation. Yes, about separation. Diego was talking about dividing assets, how the house would work, and the legal formalities of divorce. Elena responded calmly, matter-of-factly, as if it were a topic they'd discussed many times before. I stood there, trying to understand what was happening. How could they be talking about divorce so casually? When had they decided this? Why hadn't I noticed any discussion about it? It was then that I heard Elena say something that shocked me. Diego, you know this should have happened a long time ago. We were just prolonging a situation that wasn't working for either of us. And Diego's response was even more surprising. I know, Elena. I haven't been happy for a long time either. We tried, but it didn't work out. It's better to end things civilly before things get worse. Girls, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were talking about divorce, like two mature people who recognized their marriage was over. There were no accusations, no fighting, no drama. It was a rational conversation between two adults who had reached the same conclusion. And that's when Diego said something that made me understand everything. Elena, I know you found out about Carla, and I want you to know that I didn't plan for things to happen this way. Carla. Who was Carla? And what had Elena discovered? I leaned closer to the window, trying to better hear this conversation that was revealing secrets I never knew existed. Elena replied, "Diego, you've been with Carla for 5 years. 5 years? And you thought I would never find out? That I was that naive? 5 years! Diego had been cheating on Elena for 5 years. And there I was, thinking she was the one cheating on him with Gabriel. The situation was completely opposite to what I imagined." Diego continued, "I know it was cowardly of me. I should have ended the marriage when I got involved with her. But I was afraid of hurting you. I was afraid of facing the separation. I ended up being a coward and hurting you even more." And Elena, with a calmness that impressed me, replied, "Diego, what hurt me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was you treating me as if I were invisible all these years. It was making me feel worthless, uninteresting, unworthy of attention or affection." Girls, I was crying listening to this. Elena had discovered her husband's betrayal and still blamed herself, felt diminished, and thought the problem was hers. And it was then that she said something that made me understand the whole situation with Gabriel. When I met Gabriel and started working with him, I rediscovered myself as a person. He showed me that I still had value, that I was still capable, that I was still interesting. And more than that, he showed me what it means to be truly loved and respected. Gabriel wasn't a case of betrayal. Gabriel was the man who had helped Elena find herself again, regain her self-esteem, and discover that she deserved to be happy. And all this after she already knew about Diego's betrayal. Diego then said, "I saw that you were different, more confident, happier. And honestly, Elena, I was happy for you, because I know I haven't been able to make you happy for a long time." They continued talking about the practical details of the separation, how the division of assets would work, and deadlines for him to leave the house. And everything was very civilized, very respectful, like two people who had decided to go their separate ways, without resentment. When the conversation ended, I saw Diego leaving the house with a suitcase. Apparently, he was staying temporarily at Carla's house while he found a place to live. And Elena stood on the porch saying goodbye to him, not sadly, but with evident relief. As soon as Diego left, Elena picked up her cell phone and called someone. From the conversation, she could tell it was Gabriel. She said, "Honey, he's already gone. We talked and everything's settled. You can come home." Home. Elena called the house home when talking to Gabriel. They were actually living together. They had actually committed to the relationship, but it wasn't cheating. It was a new relationship that began after her marriage had effectively ended. Gabriel arrived an hour later, and Elena's welcome for him was completely different from any other I'd observed. This time there was no discretion, no concern for concealment. Elena greeted him with a passionate kiss in front of the house, without worrying about anyone watching. They walked into the house, and I could see through the living room window that they were talking animatedly, probably telling Elena about her conversation with Diego. And for the first time in all these months, I saw Elena completely free, completely happy, without a shadow of guilt or worry. That night, they had dinner in the backyard, candles and all. But this time it wasn't a secret celebration. It was an open commemoration of the official beginning of their life together. And that's when I realized how misjudged I'd been. I'd assumed Elena was cheating on Diego, when in fact she was breaking free from a marriage that had long since ended. I'd assumed she was being dishonest, when in fact she was being brave. Elena had discovered that her husband had been cheating on her for 5 years. Instead of making a fuss, instead of playing the victim, she had made a mature decision to take back her life, rediscover who she was as a person and as a professional. And when she found someone who truly loved and respected her, she had the courage to choose happiness. And Gabriel, whom I had judged as a young profiteer getting involved with an older married woman, was actually a man of integrity, who fell in love with Elena when she was already emotionally separated from her husband. He supported her professionally, helped her regain her self-esteem, and built a solid relationship with her. Over the next few days, I continued to observe the new dynamics of Elena's household, but now with a completely different perspective. I saw Gabriel arriving early in the morning, not as a secret lover, but as a companion building a life with her. They worked together on architectural projects, took care of the house together, and welcomed clients and suppliers. They were a normal couple, functioning as a normal couple, no longer needing to hide anything from anyone. And Elena was radiant. She had lost weight, was more well-groomed, more modern, more confident. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that had changed. It was her posture, her energy, the way she related to the world. She was a woman who had found herself again after years lost in a loveless marriage. A week later, I saw Elena hosting some women at her house. They were friends who had come to visit, and from the lively conversation in the backyard, I could tell they were happy with the changes in Elena's life. And it was by overhearing bits of this conversation that I learned more details about the whole story. Elena told her friends that she had discovered Diego's betrayal through text messages on his phone. She was initially devastated, but then decided she wouldn't play the victim or accept crumbs from a man who didn't value her. She said she met Gabriel through a professional project, which initially was just a work partnership, but which turned into something more as she rediscovered herself as a person. And when she realized she was falling in love with him, she had an honest conversation about the state of her marriage. Gabriel, she said, was very respectful. He said he didn't want to be the reason for a breakup, but he also couldn't ignore the feelings he'd developed for her. And that's when they decided to wait for her to resolve the situation with Diego before publicly acknowledging their relationship. In other words, they had been together, but only after she had already made the decision to separate. Gabrielle wasn't the one who destroyed her marriage. It had already been destroyed for years by Diego's neglect and betrayal. Girls, do you know what struck me most about this whole story? It was realizing how easy it is to judge people without knowing the whole truth. I spent months thinking Elena was being unfaithful, when in reality she was a brave woman who had the strength to start her life over after discovering she'd been cheating on him for 5 years. And Gabriel, who I thought was a reckless young man taking advantage of a married woman, was actually an emotionally mature man who fell in love with Elena and supported her through one of the most difficult times in her life. Today, 3 months after Diego left home, Elena and Gabriel are living a normal life as a couple. They work together, travel to visit clients, and entertain friends at home. Elena is radiant, fulfilled professionally and personally. She resumed her career as an architect after more than 20 years of inactivity and is enjoying great success. Her projects are being recognized, she's winning awards, and she's being invited to lecture. And Gabriel is the perfect partner. He supports her professionally and loves her unconditionally. The age difference, which I thought would be a problem, actually means nothing to them. Gabriel has an emotional maturity that many older men lack, and Elena has an energy and youthfulness that perfectly matches his personality. And Diego is officially living with Carla, the woman he cheated on Elena with 5 years ago. From what I've heard from neighborhood gossip, they're planning to get married as soon as his divorce from Elena is final. The most ironic thing about all this is that in the end, everyone was happy. Elena found true love with Gabriel. Diego embraced the relationship he'd had with Carla for 5 years. And I learned a valuable lesson about not judging people without knowing the whole story. This experience made me reflect on how often we see a situation and jump to conclusions. How often we condemn someone without knowing the circumstances that led to that situation. How often we judge based on appearances, prejudices, or lack of information. Elena could have stayed in her unhappy marriage, pretending she didn't know about the betrayal, settling for the crumbs of attention Diego gave her. Unfortunately, Many women do this. They stay in relationships that don't work out of fear, complacency, or social pressure. But Eleanor had the courage to choose happiness. She had the courage to start over at 45. She had the courage to fall in love with a younger man, to face society's judgments, to build a new life from scratch. And Gabriel had the maturity to wait, to respect her process, to not pressure her to make hasty decisions. He supported her as a professional partner, as a friend, as a companion, until she was ready to publicly acknowledge their relationship. Today, when I see them together on the porch having breakfast or working in the office they set up at home, or simply talking in the backyard in the late afternoon, I feel genuine joy for them. Elena found a man who treats her as she deserves to be treated, with love, with respect, as a partner, as an equal. And Gabriel found an experienced, intelligent, well-resolved woman who knows how to value those who value her. Of course, they'll still face challenges. The age difference may pose some challenges in the future. Society isn't always kind to couples who deviate from the conventional norm. But if there's one thing I've learned from observing them all this time, it's that when there's true love, mutual respect, and companionship, any obstacle can be overcome. And you know what, girls? This story made me rethink my own life too. It made me question whether I'm truly happy, whether I'm living the way I want to live, whether I'm wasting time in situations that aren't good for me just because I'm afraid of change. Elena taught me that it's never too late to start over, that we don't have to settle for situations that diminish us, that happiness is a choice, and sometimes that choice requires the courage to make difficult decisions. So, girls, if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified whenever I post new neighborhood gossip. Like the video if you think Elena made the right choice, and let me know what you thought of this whole story in the comments. And don't forget the materials I left in the first pinned comment. They're content that can truly transform your life, just like Elena transformed hers. Just click the link and download. Life is too short to waste it on people who don't value us, girls. If Elena could start over at 45 and find happiness, so can we all, no matter how old we are. What do you guys think? Was Elena right to choose happiness with Gabriel? Or do you think she should have tried to save her marriage with Diego? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because I love hearing your thoughts on all these stories. Until the next neighborhood gossip, and remember, sometimes things aren't quite what they seem. Sometimes the truth is much more interesting and surprising than our imaginations can conjure. Bye, girls.